It's all a lie. It's the biggest hoax in human history, and you've got to wake up to this. Man-made, anti-gravity, going all the way back to the late 50s and 60s. There's an entire history of aerospace research and development that's now 62 years on, using technologies that are having to do with mass cancellation. An Air Force Office of Special Investigations counterintelligence officer who confirms the false flag, confirms the military's involvement in staging the abductions of humans, making it look alien, confirms that he carried bags of cash to people in the mainstream media to influence stories and coverage of this issue. And I want to put this into three categories. You have assets that are material, stagecraft, and let's call these advanced aircraft of man-made origin, all right? And I'm going to show you some tonight, and it will blow your mind, and it should, but are, things like this. Man-made, anti-gravity, going all the way back to the late 50s and 60s. Triangular, disc, boomerang, etc. Around October 1954, we attained gravity control. So gravity control meaning electromagnetic systems that affect an object so it becomes seemingly weightless, levitates, and corrects for gravity. Now, that research actually began with T. Townsend Brown and others in the 20s, if you look into this. And the 𝗠𝗏𝗏𝗏 experiment in Germany and others were using very high voltage, high frequency systems at certain hertz, cycles per second, that would cause a change in the atomic structure and the magnetic field in such a way that you could essentially cancel mass. Okay, so without boring people with a physics lesson, if you make something close to massless, no weight, but weight is different from mass, massless, then you can accelerate it at enormous speeds with very little power. And it can go right-hand turns, go up and down, and if you can control for the interior at 1G, in other words, one gravitational field, then you can go at 100,000 miles per hour, make a right-hand turn, and your brains don't come out of your ears, which was what would happen in a jet aircraft. So that work was being done in open source and then classified projects since the late 20s. The secret weapon that we had was the atomic bomb. The secret weapon Adolf Hitler was working on was this. Okay, and the so-called 𝗦𝗏𝗶𝗹 and they never got it stabilized. No, so it would lift up and move around. We have video footage of it. It'll be in the film, actual footage. However, they never got it stable enough to do a lot with it. So Wernher von Braun, Hermann Oberth, and others who'd worked at 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and these other facilities for the Germans in World War II were brought into, instead of being executed, like many Nazis were, they were brought into our intelligence community, into our aerospace community. And some of them, unfortunately, took it over from inside. So in a sense, we're living through the Fourth Reich. We defeated World War II, was the Third Reich, Nazis, but they learned to, instead of clumsily stumbling around doing it that way, they went subterranean. So the globe today is a Fourth Reichian fascist order. Now, I say this with no pleasure, and I am not speaking hyperbole. And that is the problem. It's a very huge problem. And there are all kinds of actors and players that have glommed on to that agenda, a bizarre collection of people from different walks of life and different agendas. We'll get into this later. But the secrecy around this issue it's only been partial. They have been wanting a certain acculturation around UFOs and ETs for the purpose of having the public think that it could be true, but they don't really know what it is. So right now, more than half the public, over this longitudinal, long-term psychological propaganda warfare program launched in the 50s, believe UFOs are real. They believe there's intelligent life in the universe. But that's about where the granular knowledge ends. There's not a lot of granular knowledge, detailed knowledge of what all this is. And the truth is that this area of anti-gravity, let's call it, for pop culture usage, the EMGs, electromagnetic gravitics, gravity control, this became the focus of the aerospace industry and actually was reported open source in aerospace journals in the late 40s and early 50s, and then it went all black. This is a documented fact. Why did it go black? Because they finally figured out how to master it, and they didn't need to have more people joining in. So they wanted to close off that discussion. So in October 1954, gravity control was mastered, and we began to build various prototypes of what the public would call UFOs. And some were made to simulate the shape, appearance, and motion of an extraterrestrial vehicle. Because what better way to confuse people than to have something that looks almost the same? Is it gold? Is it fool's gold? Is it real? Is it Memorex? Get where I'm going here? This is how the spy masters operate. And luckily for them, and unfortunately for us, with the absence of the fourth estate and independent science and independent oversight from the public interest, the Commonwealth, they've been able to get away with enormous deception since the 50s. So I call those the assets that are material, physical craft. Now that's one category. We'll return to this. There's another category, and this is more difficult to understand, and that is electromagnetic assets. And these include electromagnetic systems that could optically, like a very advanced hologram, simulate an event. Electromagnetic systems that have been called popularly electronic warfare systems that are psychotronic and radionic, that interface with consciousness and thought. And electromagnetic systems that can affect large segments of the population when targeted. Now these began to be developed quite in an advanced fashion by the 40s and 50s. And by 1956, it had been accomplished to the point of state of the art. So about a year after I was born. And then the other asset, the third category, is human intelligence, human assets. And these are folks who, some wittingly, some unwittingly, have been provided with a script and experiences that they honestly believe are real, but that have been programmed and are like very advanced consciousness holographic experiences, if you will, electronic hallucinations. And we'll get into this also. This gets into some issues that are going to make me very unpopular with some folks. I don't care. And we don't have time for that. I don't care if you like me, love me, hate me. People got to know the truth on this. So I really don't. I'm not running for mayor of Crazy Town. I just want the truth out, because we can't afford this childishness. Now, so those three categories in general are what we're going to focus on. First, let's talk about the air forms, let's call them, material assets, that are being made by Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, Northrop Grumman, my uncle's old company, Boeing, Phantom Works, etc. And I have many, many people who have worked in these aerospace programs, also at EG&G here. I mean, we're in Las Vegas, in the Nellis Range, so-called Area 51's up the road. It's an old facility, but we'll talk about which facilities are key. But those military and corporate contractors have always had compartmented operations dealing with this, going back to after World War II. Now, some of the material that was being done by the Nazis with the so-called 𝗦𝗫𝗶𝗹 that was anti-gravity, but it was not well controlled, and they hadn't developed it well by the end of the war. We detonated the first atomic bomb first. Began to get more and more perfected. And as I mentioned, by 1954, gravity control was attained. At that point, we had a race to see how we could, how many of these forms we could develop, and the research between the mid-40s and the mid-50s was augmented, assisted, or propelled forward by the reverse engineering and study in a separate compartment of so-called extraterrestrial material. I'm referring now to things that some of you have heard about, like certainly the Roswell crash, Kingman, Arizona event. There are others that have happened, and these objects, which were downed with electronic warfare systems, they didn't just fly in and crash in an electrical storm. That's a myth. You don't go through interstellar space and come into the atmosphere of Earth and oops, I can't navigate, and then just suddenly crash. And it happens to be right by the only atomic bomb squadron in the world in Roswell, New Mexico. That was the only 509th Bomber Squadron was the only place in the world at the time of that event. And the interstellar civilizations were worried about what is going on Earth, because when we detonated those bombs, it was picked up by them. And they came, and they're here, and they're worried, and they should be worried. So that's what opened up the modern era of UFO extraterrestrial activity. And this is why you need to call this what it is. There's two things here. There's, UFO is a sort of a general phrase. It just means an unidentified flying object. Well, it's unidentified only to people who are not informed. They don't fly in any normal sense of the aerodynamics flying of a plane, but they are objects. So the only true part of the word UFO is O, and the rest is an obfuscation. So a blurring of the truth. But if you use that pop culture term of UFO, there are two types. Man-made ones here, interstellar extraterrestrial ones here. And you can tell the difference if you get up close enough, if you know what you're looking for. And we'll talk about that. The ones that were being developed by these early aerospace and research efforts were then benefited by studying the extraterrestrial objects, that we began to learn how to use electromagnetic scalar longitudinal systems. Now, I'm not going to get into a big physics discussion here, except to say the light you're seeing here is in a wave like this, right? So you have a wavelength, and so you have all kinds of spectra. Infrared, ultraviolet, visible spectra, different. A laser is coherent light. So a green laser is all the green, and it's coherently propagating, okay? Longitudinal or scalar electromagnetic signal is actually not a wave, but a point in a line. And it actually can propagate at multiples of the speed of light, of the waveform of light. So the waveform of light is what we call the speed of light, but there's this other type. So that began to be studied also in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, began to be weaponized into systems, and by 1947 or so, they began to have, and I use this word cautiously, successful deployments of it so that it would hit an interstellar vehicle, interfere with its electronics, and have it crash. Now, I know men personally who have operated those systems up to and including recently in the last few years at facilities at various places around the globe. So when you begin to hear that beginning from the 40s until not that long ago, there were multiple crash retrievals of these objects, it wasn't because these interstellar civilizations who they're running around with IQs of 400 to 600. So I'm like a Down syndrome child, and but they're very advanced. They were running into the deployment of these systems, and they were based all over, and they began to be based all over the planet. And by the 1960s, they had successfully propagated those around the globe in enough locations covertly that they could track and target an extraterrestrial vehicle, hit it, and have it to become disabled. Now, obviously not every ET object that appears has that happen, so it's not like it happens every nanosecond, but it has happened dozens and perhaps hundreds of times. I met with an officer in the Air Force, in the Army, who was at Fort 𝗏𝗏 out here in Arizona, Army Intelligence Headquarters, who had been in an underground facility in the 70s, where there were 9 extraterrestrial vehicles and autopsied bodies that were in storage there. So, and that's just one facility, and that was 40 some years ago. Fort 𝗏𝗏, it's near Tombstone, ironically, Arizona. So these facilities began to be developed that are all underground, and they were studying the extraterrestrial material. That operation was very separate from the conventional, let's call it, extraordinary anti-gravity research going on in other operations. There are very few points of contact. So this is where you get into a complex understanding of TSSCI, Top Secret Special Compartmented Information or Intelligence. And the compartmentalization is very, very specific. And there could be people working on, say, gravity control systems for the Lockheed Skunk Works, but they weren't allowed to talk to and didn't know anything about the people studying the extraterrestrial materials, but there would be a few points of contact that would bridge it over. All right, but very few, very tightly compartmented. That's how that is structured. And I have had the privilege of interviewing people who worked on both sides. Now, when you begin to consider then, we've had over 60 years, 62 years, and trillions of dollars in black budget unacknowledged special access funding, USAP, unacknowledged special access, completely black, funding of this kind of research and development, both on extraterrestrial material and on other conventional, and the then augmentation of the conventional anti-gravity human with the extraterrestrial studied material, you can begin to realize that what's out there that humans control is fearsome and awesome. And unfortunately, to the lay person or to the average general, admiral, or president, is indistinguishable from an extraterrestrial object in their mind. So that is really the danger point. That is where you have the risk of you being able to take these objects that are 100% man-made. And for example, this boomerang flying object seen around the Hudson Valley, I believe this one. And the Hudson Valley events and the reported up and down, I think it was 88, something like that. And people got right up underneath it. Look what's underneath. Do you see that? Little tubes and structures and grids and what have you. That's not extraterrestrial. That's man-made. Probably out of the Boeing Phantom Works out of Seattle. And they were just seeing what the public would do. So people were stopped on the freeway reporting it. Tens of thousands of people saw these. Silent. A little bit of a humming sound, like a transformer. 100% man-made. 100% fooled everyone looking at it, thought it was ET. This is what I'm saying. False flags already happened. But they've been beta testing the system with these kinds of events. Another one that was reported are the big flying triangles, 200-300 feet across. Remember these? Belgium, other places. Look underneath. So these have been reported, and they have a grid structure, very manufactured, very man-made. Silent, except for a little bit of a humming sound when you're close. Electromagnetogravitics, floats along. Now, here's another layer of confusion that I didn't get a chance to share this with Mr. Schratt. There are extraterrestrial objects that look like and approximate the man-made ones. You want to get a little more confused. Consider that if there's an extraterrestrial event that happens, they will then put up a man-made one, and they'll hoax a man-made event piggybacking on an extraterrestrial one, just to really confuse the picture. And that's happened many, many times. And there's a plethora of these that are very strange looking. This is another one. You see the structure reported in a case. Now, Mr. Schratt has collected the best eyewitness documents of these at close range from people, and then done models and drawings and what have you, and they're excellent. And these are all man-made. Now, to anyone who would casually see this, and then objects that were very similar to what was seen in the Phoenix lights, these sort of objects. You know, a fraction of a mile across. Also, can be, not always are, can be human man-made ones. If I'm confusing you, I apologize. But I think the nuance of this can't be lost anymore. We can't be simplistic and, frankly, stupid. And that's why when you have these wonderful, renditions that he's done. Here's another one I showed earlier. And this one. And this is a wonderful. You can zoom in on this one, because someone got up close enough to this to see the structure under this anti-gravity system. Man-made also. So there's an entire history of aerospace research and development that's now 62 years on, using technologies that are having to do with mass cancellation, anti-gravity. And those have been deployed purposely so that it'll get into the media and thousands of people will see it, and it will either hide an extraterrestrial event and overwhelm it, or it will simply be a way of them testing the system to see what will the people say, what will the media say, how are they going to react, and then they can refine their algorithm, their protocol for how to do the hoax down the road. This is how they refine the false flag over a 60-year period. Now, one of the people who you all have heard of, I'm sure, who was the Lockheed Skunk Works head for years until he passed away, is Ben Rich. And I have people who were at meetings with him where he confirmed that we had things that could, quote, take ET home. And he also acknowledged that every point in space and time is connected to every other one through consciousness, and that telepathy, as it's commonly called, is real, etc. But Ben Rich may not have had all full access up to that level. And in some letters that we have, courtesy of Mr. Schratt, and I just laid eyes on these today. I have a letter, Lockheed Advanced Aeronautics, to a gentleman, Mr. John Andrews. He says, and the first letter that was written to him was, do you think that the UFOs are real, and et cetera, and so on. And he says, in response to your letter, I am a believer, so is Kelly Johnson. who of course, were the U-2 spy plane. With regards to another gentleman's comment, I do not believe any Lockheed person could or would have made that commitment. Rest easy. Anyway, and it's signed 𝗏𝗏, July 8th, 1986. And so in this, the letter, he asked for a clarification. And he says, did you mean UFOs as in man-made or extraterrestrial? And 𝗏𝗏, the head of the very famous Lockheed Skunk Works, says, Dear John, this is the July 21st, 1986. Yes, I'm a believer in both categories. I feel everything is possible. Many of our man-made UFOs are unfunded opportunities. He underlined UFO and unfunded opportunities. In both categories, there are lots of kooks and charlatans, so be careful. Best regards, 𝗏𝗏. Here it is. Explosive, dispositive. Now, he, again, would not have had a complete all-access pass into every compartment, extraterrestrial and man-made, because the intelligence officer that we have recently interviewed confirmed that the area at Nellis Air Force Base that dealt with man-made advanced UFO-type anti-gravity was completely separate from and hermetically sealed from the extraterrestrial facility underground that was run by people, not ETs, but that had the ET craft that were studied. We've also had it confirmed that the very famous Cash Landrum case, how many people have heard of this? In the early 80s, and there was a craft outside Houston that had a core breach and was spewing radioactive material and injured and killed a couple of women. And it looked like a saucer, and it was flying, and they had to call in helicopters to assist, and it made a crash landing in a remote area. This Air Force Office of Special Investigations official on camera admits that he was the principal investigator that for the Air Force put out the cover story that it was a UFO. And he said it was one of ours, but the skin of the craft, the shell, was extraterrestrial. The power plant, which they had not been able to fully figure out, had a hybrid system that had a nuclear power component that had a filtering problem and a core breach and began to spew radioactivity on people. And this is on camera. This is a lieutenant colonel, name, rank, serial number. I'm telling you, this is going to be explosive, this movie, Unacknowledged. So what you need to understand is that the intelligence community is thrilled if the UFO community says, it was a UFO, it was all alien. When in reality, it's not that simple. It's both. Some of it's ET, some of it's man-made. Some of it's both. And the Cash Landrum crash case was both. So this understanding is key. Otherwise, everyone's going to assume anything that we don't understand that zips around is extraterrestrial. Moreover, anything that would come over and do an Independence Day attack, boom, is extraterrestrial, when it isn't. It is not. It is absolutely not. It's all a lie. It's the biggest hoax in human history, and you've got to wake up to this.
If you like this video and you want to see more amazing content, go ahead and check out the next video on our channel.